This is Breaking the Line, the ECNL Podcast, featuring ECNL President and CEO Christian Lavers and ECNL Vice President Doug Bracken. This week's show comes to you from the ECNL Coaching Symposium and AGM held in Las Vegas, February 4th and February 5. Breaking the Line, the ECNL Podcast, is dedicated to each and every member of the ECNL, and today's show has to be one of the most fascinating shows the ECNL has ever done.
Hi, this is Christian Lavers. I'd like to welcome you to the 2025 ECNL Coaching Symposium. We're sitting here in a podcast discussion with four extraordinary leaders who are going to be presenting over the next 2 days here to the almost 1,000 coaches from around the country that are in attendance to learn, to network, to help make the sport better. So we're really thrilled to have you guys. You're experts in your field across the world. Very, very eclectic group of experiences, which is why we brought you together here. So we'll just introduce you very quickly. Eric Potterat, retired Navy commander. Anson Dorrance, longtime coach at UNC Chapel Hill and the women's national team. Peter Kenyon, CEO of Manchester United and Chelsea. And Jeremy Boone, winning leader, expert on axiology, which we'll learn about, and high character and leadership. So welcome, you guys. We're thrilled to have you here. This is going to be a really open-ended discussion. We're just going to throw questions at you, see where it goes. People can take answers. The more I'm sitting and listening and you're talking, the better this is going to be. So welcome. Doug?
Yeah, thanks for having us, guys. Thanks for showing, coming and supporting and presenting at our symposium. This will be the biggest symposium we've ever had. So really super excited to have you guys and have this conversation.
Fantastic. So I'm going to start and just throw out a general question here, and I'm going to say, when you observe truly exceptional leaders, and you've worked with them all as players, as athletes, as special forces, in all sorts of industries and areas, what patterns or qualities do you notice that separate them from merely good leaders? What's the difference between good and great in leadership, and what are the differentiators that most people miss when they're looking to evaluate leaders or evaluate people for leadership positions?
Because I coach on the women's side of the ledger, the biggest issue for me is to find a courageous woman that's going to, using Brene Brown's statement, dare to lead. The biggest issue we have right now in women's athletics, in my experience, is we certainly have women with huge potential to lead, but they're so concerned about the opinion of the people in the group that she's leading, they're reluctant to say anything. So basically what ends up happening, and this is a big issue, one of the things I talk about all the time when I am chatting with trying to develop the leaders on my team at the University of North Carolina is to get them to actually open their mouths. And so for me, there's a gender difference in this area, and we've got to figure out a way to try to resolve it. And for us right now, I think the critical element is to get them to have the guts to say something, knowing that when they say something, they're going to get some sort of criticism from people within the group. And I think it's that fear they have, and they're reluctant to really lead effectively. So for me, this is a very critical area, and I'm actually very happy you began with this question.
Eric, do you have a reaction to that?
Yeah, so I've had the luxury of working multiple different verticals. I've worked, obviously in the military and professional sport and business, and I think it really, for me, it comes down to really 6 key attributes or qualities of the best leaders or coaches. And I think number 1 is accountability. I think that goes without saying. I think number 2 is communication, clear, consistent, concise communication. I think the next 4 are very interesting. It's curiosity. I think the best leaders and coaches are more concerned about the why and the how rather than the what. So they're always trying to dig in and learn a little bit more about their craft. I think reflective thinking is the 4th attribute that I notice. And the best way to describe this is really like a chess player. Good reflective thinkers think about things that could be consequential before they make a move. Low reflective leaders have a bias towards action, and then more times than not, they are hyper concerned about, hey, I wish I had given that more time. So I think being reflective is important. I think emotional intelligence is the 5th. I think that goes without saying. Know your own emotions, be self-aware. I think that's important. And then lastly, I hate to sound like a performance psychologist, but I think the best leaders have a high degree of empathy. Their ability to temporarily put their own perspective aside to understand the perspective of the individual they're trying to lead, first and foremost.
So we have a couple of comments on communication. I'm going to turn to you, Jeremy, and maybe as you answer this, you can even give us a little bit of a sense of what your field in axiology is, if it ties into this.
Yeah, axiology complements psychology. Axiology is the science of human value and decision making. It's a mathematical-based science. And so it measures how an individual assigns value to themselves in their self-view, and then it measures how they assign value in their worldview, so everything outside of your skin. And then it can take that pattern and look and say, is that pattern fit with the objective of what the individual is trying to do? So an easy way to summarize that is that neuroscience is to the brain as axiology is to the mind, all right, to be able to do that. A couple other things I think I would add, to later on top of your comments of your 6, and those are foundational and critical. We find a couple of other different elements to that. Number one, difference between a good leader and a great leader. A great leader is very, very clear about what the future looks like. There's no guesswork. It's not a mist. It's not a fog. And they can come back from the future into the present and then take people with them to get into the future. That's the difference between a great leader and a manager. A manager starts today and just gets my team to the end of today, and then I start again to tomorrow. So, clarity of the future is definitely an element. Connection, not just communication. And at times we could even maybe argue that connection trumps communication. And my ability to connect with people, with themselves and how they fit into this desirable but difficult to achieve future that I'm going to make real as a leader for you and the people that come with me. I think that's important. A great leader also gives a daily invitation. They just don't pitch at the beginning of a preseason or the beginning of the annual cycle year in the executive space, like Eric mentioned where he is in too. They don't pitch that as a static piece. Daily they come back and they give that invitation over and over and over again to make sure that people have ownership into what that is. It's not just a leader's story. It's everybody's story. So when you said accountability, man, that was right. That accountability is an offer of invitation of ownership into this future that we want together. And if we do that together, then we have a way to protect the mission.
So you're talking about accountability to be clear about the mission and the vision and the values. Obviously, Peter, you've worked with some exceptional leaders and coaches that they probably don't get too different in style than Jose Mourinho as a coach and Alex Ferguson. Maybe you shed light on that, but what would you add to this discussion?
There are bigger differences than those two, let me tell you. But I think accountability and responsibility is right up there. And I think vision. And then this issue of leaders take people with them. Right? They go first and then bring people with them. They don't push people out front and follow. I've had some great opportunities to work with some of the best talent. And some of the best talent in the world are not leaders. They're just great at what they do, right? So don't mix one with the other. Somebody who's really good at their job, actually you want him to be really good at the job. Not every one of those can be a leader. And leadership is many different styles. So a leader in one organisation is not necessarily a good leader in another, because it's what he surrounds himself with or he's surrounded by. So it's a fluid. It isn't, annual business plan and this is my leadership piece. They don't think like that. They think broader, bigger, different. I think they almost come out and look overview. They have a very good overview. And then, Ferguson, one of the best people management. He led through just being incredibly good at people management. There was a culture which, was around him, but it was built on what Manchester United was. He fundamentally understood what it was to be a coach or a player. And he actually developed a lot of leaders within the team. And that was a common thing with Mourinho. Mourinho had 3 captains on the team any time he played. John Terry, Didier Drogba, Frank Lampard, right? And within that group, they knew who the senior boy was, right? So the leadership is very flexible. It's not, tick the box and you're a leader. And it's demonstrated, particularly in my experience of sport, in multiple ways. We
have, obviously, being a youth soccer league, we have what I think is an incredible responsibility to help teach and develop the next generation of leaders. So you guys identified what makes a great leader. How do you teach the next generation to be leaders or develop those young people to be our next generation of leaders?
I think real big leaders are born, right? I think you develop them. You don't create them. I think you identify them, because they will identify themselves right the way through the process. I think when they're at school, when they're at university, when they're in the job environment, they step up. They're different. The top real leaders that I know are all different, whether that's industry or sport or medic.
Anson's shaking his head.
Yeah, I completely agree with him. I had an opportunity to teach a course at the University of North Carolina the last couple of springs. And because obviously the political climate in this country is so contentious, I had a debate with a fellow professor on the first day of class. And the debate we were having was, can you teach leadership? And so I don't think you can. And why do I not think you can develop leadership, even though if you look at the kids that have come through our program that have ended up in amazing leadership positions, I was just given them as an extraordinary leader, and I gave them a chance to lead, and then they did. And trust me, I've done everything under the sun to try to develop leadership, and I don't really see myself moving the needle with the kids that I'm training and developing. But all of a sudden, you give a kid a chance to lead, and you can see whether they will actually lead. I mean, obviously, the president of U.S. Soccer right now is Cindy Parlow. She was one of my captains. But I don't think I really contributed to her leadership. I just put her in a position where she could lead, and then she just took off and led teams that way. So this debate we have on the first day of class is this wonderful professor, who's, by the way, his IQ is so way beyond mine. It's sort of an unfair debate, but he's in there. His name is Jeff Green. He teaches in our School of Education. And what he is basically debating is that you can, and he's talking about these different ways they move the needle in leadership. I've tried absolutely everything under the sun, and I don't really see myself moving the needle. But what happens is exactly what you described, Peter. What happens is all of a sudden you've got this extraordinary leader within your culture, and all of a sudden you give them an opportunity to lead, and they take off. And getting back to the gender difference thing, because obviously I work in the women's game, so for me, this is a very critical area. We've had some extraordinary teams with great talent that didn't win championships because the leadership was average at best. And we've had other teams without as much talent that ended up doing amazing things because the leadership was extraordinary. And by the way, Jeremy, I love your stuff because for me, everything is about character development. And if you want to develop a culture of extraordinary people that have extraordinary success, the culture piece is absolutely vital. And I think a piece that all of us miss in coaching is that address. And so I think too many of us are concerned about the X's and O's and those sorts of different elements. Too many of us are concerned about, all right, I'm going to create and develop a leader, and then we're basically wasting our time if we haven't solved the character piece. So for me, this conversation right now is off the charts. I've really appreciated and enjoyed it. I know I'm going to learn things in the next 2 days.
I love this question. I think this is maybe the most fun question to debate. Can leaders, be made, or are they born? I think there are a couple other elements on top of what both of you all said, which is this. The narrative will reveal the leader, is what I continue to find. So it's like you just don't have a leader or you don't, right? It's not a title or a paycheck, or the leaders that rise up and succeed and get people to come with them, to your point, are the ones that see themselves so clearly in that narrative. They are connected to that narrative with conviction, not of just, I'm kind of interested. I'm not just passionate about soccer. Some of the best leaders that I've seen, they are convicted to make that future come true. And which leads to the second piece about developing leaders. The mistake is that people chase leadership development as a skill. Go look at books. Go look at podcasts. Go look at YouTube videos. Go look at and every article on HBR is about the skill of leadership. Leadership doesn't start with a skill. That's the problem. And so if we take a traditional approach to try and develop leaders, guess what we're going to get? Traditional results.
So let me ask that. When you say it doesn't start with a skill, be specific on what do you believe it starts with?
Yeah, it doesn't. It starts with capacity. And that's where, and probably, much like Eric in his work, we kind of swim in the same lanes in maybe some different ways, but the same lanes. And if we're going to go in and look at, does this individual have the potential to lead this company and be the CEO of a $15 billion company? It's not about skill set. Do they have the capacity to lead? What's the narrative? In their self-narrative, we got to start there. That they have the capacity to be able to lean in and execute. Then we can build skills. Skills are just repetition to be able to do that. But every one of these gentlemen up here that have incredible stories, I mean, beyond anything I've accomplished, is because they had the capacity to do so, and then they layered in with their talents, gifts that they brought every day as leaders, and then those skills are just the icing on the cake.
So back to your question, I think this hits a chord for me, the youth, and what we're doing to kind of embody and strengthen kind of the youth mindset, if you will. I agree with everything the gentlemen here have said with respect to leadership. The one caveat I'll throw in that's a bit of a curveball is I do believe, in my opinion, one of the quickest derailers of leadership is adversity. And I do strongly believe we have a responsibility to teach our youth adversity tolerance. And I think whether we call these mental skills, you're going to hear some of that today. I think there's a lot of empirically based things that we can certainly strengthen that muscle and at least lessen the odds of leaders getting off track or off ramped when adversity happens. Adversity is the new constant. It's going to happen. And I think, I'm not going to be political here, I'm going to be careful. I think most organizations don't focus downstream enough with really empowering evidence-based ways to really teach adversity tolerance.
So let me jump on that, and I'll maybe throw a variation here, because when you talk about resilience or adversity tolerance, you've worked with Navy SEALs, you've worked in athletics, you talked about business. How do you build the capacity to be resilient? Yeah. How do you build the capacity to tolerate adversity? When you talk about the capacity you have, expand on that and how you grow in that space.
So I think there's a reasonable methodology that one has to give skill training first. And I hesitate to say death by PowerPoint, but there has to be some rudimentary understanding of these are the things that one can apply. Now, where most organizations fail, and the SEALs were probably the best in the world at this, is there's something called in vivo training. You teach these things and you have them practice these skills in a highly stressful situation. We did this with Red Bull, with grizzly bears and snakes. You'll hear that today. And I do think it's important to really maximize the human stress response ethically and allow the youth or the individuals to then practice what they've learned in an in vivo, highly stressful environment.
That's an interesting perspective, because I do believe that so much of our culture right now does not want stress in any fashion or form.
Absolutely, and that's not political, but it's just does not allow you to do that.
We remove the barriers instead of allowing them, is basically what you're saying.
Yeah, all the guys I know who are great leaders in the sport that we're all talking about today, they've had adversity throughout their life. They grew up with it. They were born with it, right? I don't know one who's got a silver spoon in his mouth who's become that level of leader.
Yeah, let me jump in. First of all, Eric, I love it. I absolutely love everything you shared, because I think these pieces are absolutely critical. I read a book in the mid-'90s called Greater Expectations. It was written by William Damon. And what he talks about the culture of the way we raise our kids. And there was this self-esteem idea back in the day where if you want to construct an extraordinary child, you would protect them from the chaos of the universe by praising them for everything they did. And all kinds of ridiculous things happened because of this, the way we were advised to raise our kids. And one thing that happened is basically they lost a sense of what a standard was, because anything they did was praiseworthy. And one thing I love about my athletic director at the University of North Carolina, Bubba Cunningham, is he brings in the eminent sociologists to speak with us every 5 years or so. My favorite one was brought in the year 2012. I don't remember everything he said, but I do remember the first two slides. The first slide was, the date on the slide was 1969. This kid's coming, and why do I remember that? That's my high school graduation year. So this kid comes home from school. He has all F's on his report card, and the parents are screaming at the kid. And now we're shifting to the kids we're recruiting and training, which is 2012. This kid comes home from school with all F's in his report card, and the parents are screaming at the teacher. So now the way, I guess we've redesigned the helicopter parent, the new parent is the snowplow parent. The snowplow parent doesn't just hover above the kid and watch over them. The snowplow parent literally pushes every obstacle out of the way for their children so they don't have to face adversity. And this issue with not facing adversity means they are never going to actually be able to achieve anything because they're protected from absolutely everything. And so what did we do at the University of North Carolina? What did I do when, I was selected to coach the U.S. women's national team back in the mid-'80s? We have this thing called the competitive cauldron. Guess what? This is a meritocracy. And if we've selected a 32-player list for the U.S. women's national team, we're going to have, 28 different categories where you're ranked from 1 to basically 32. Well, actually not 32 because 4 of them are goalkeepers. So basically to 28. And so you know exactly where you stand. So all of a sudden this climate where these kids are being raised to basically be protected from the chaos of the universe, they're exposed now because everything is ranked. This is a meritocracy. And by the way, it is stressful. So if you can't handle this, take up, hopscotch where there's no one's getting in your way for you trying to finish this sequence effectively. And so, Eric, I'm with you absolutely 100%. I really appreciate listening to that.
Yeah, I love this. I wish, can we make this like 3 hours long? It's like, seriously, this is great. About a month ago, was wrapping up the off season for the spring sports in college, getting ready. And I had a coach who won a national championship last year who called me with a unique situation around his captain was struggling because the seniors on the team, now Anson, you got to shake your head. The seniors on the team, the rising seniors this year, they won a national championship last year, went to the coaching staff to complain because the captain was holding them accountable. True story. These guys won the national championship last year, and they didn't want to be held accountable. They were comfortable in their story. And I think comfort is the key word when we talk about resilience and youth and what are we doing, right? Because growth dies in our comfort. The 3 rules of growth. Growth dies in your comfort zone. What's best for you is outside of your comfort zone. Your brain is going to fight like heck to keep you inside of your comfort zone. And so if we're just reinforcing comfort, or if we're reinforcing leadership as a short game. Like I couldn't imagine to be a coach in college right now of kids who, if I don't win now, I don't want to be comfortable. I'm going to go to a different place so I can be a part of winning and not the reason that we win, which ties back to the skill sets of resiliency. And I think that's what we really have to question right now and how we're going to try to reveal and develop young leaders, if we can do that, of what uncomfortable situations actually look like to put people in.
Building on the resiliency, the other characteristic that I see in the guys that I respect and see as really the top pinnacle of leadership in our sport, they've got great empathy, right, to your point, which most people would not attribute empathy to them because they're the toughest people in the world. They will make the decisions that need to be made for the greater good. And it's they operate in these dual worlds, these extremes, I think. They'll take the hardest decision against the guy that probably has delivered more to them than anybody else in that team.
So let me expand on that because it's a perfect segue. Thank you. I was going to ask, you've all worked with exceptional performers at an individual level, and how do you keep the exceptional performer contributing to the team and balance that individual excellence, individual aspiration, we have a very me culture in society. How do you make sure that stays contributing to the team and it doesn't break apart with a bunch of egos or a bunch of people that are more focused on their own individual success or performance than the team?
They need managing as well. the leaders need managing as well, right? Never let a leader just be the one, right? So the coach in our sport is very much the face of the team in most organisations, but he needs leading. He needs managing, right?
I think for me, there's some bad words when it comes to teaming, and I think me, my, and I are those bad words. I think we, us, ours are something that kind of needs to be brainwashed. I know it sounds cliche, but the me, my, I people, they really generally, there might be some outlier exceptions, but generally speaking, they're going to be a detriment to teaming. So it's a we, us, ours.
Can you even read into how much somebody uses those words and when they speak about their team or their role on a team?
Yes and no. In my experience, I think there is some verbiage that comes out of their mouths, but also it's about performance, what they're doing. Does it seem to be self-driven as opposed to the greater good? And I think when it comes to team sports, it has to be the greater good. We have to put our own individual accomplishments aside and, sacrifice, if you will. I know that sounds a bit, again, cliche, but it's really important. And I think that needs to start, to your point, with kind of youth training as well. There's no me, my, I. This is the wrong, team sports are the wrong place for that. Individual sport, maybe. I mean, you can get away with that as a tennis player, pickleball player, golfer, maybe. Yeah.
It feels like this answer and this question just goes directly back to the culture that's created and what the leader sets up and what they're willing to accept or not accept and how you create that. And I think everybody who's listening to this would ask that question. How do you create a culture of us, our, right? And combat the I, me, my kind of idea. And that, it seems, as somebody who's experienced it, I'm sure you all have too, and Christian would say, when you're with a team, it's a daunting task to create that culture. So any words of wisdom on how to do that?
The raging debate we all have in our coaches meetings when we assemble all the coaches at the University of North Carolina is whether you recruit the extraordinary talent that can help you win games with the sacrifice of recruiting someone with below average character. So you watch this kid play. You're out there, on the ECNL fields, and we're watching these kids play. And you're never going to get the truth out of the ECNL coach because they're dying for the kid to represent them at the University of North Carolina. So when you speak to the coach, even though they know this kid, compromises the culture, they're dying for you to end up with this kid. So you don't really get a good character assessment. And also the last thing you can do right now in my profession is to actually send a psychological profile to the kid to have her take it, because you're never going to sign another player if that's all of a sudden your process. And so the debate we go through in the room, all of the coaches in the room talk about bringing in the exceptional player, because you're watching them play going, holy cow, we're going to win a heck of a lot of games with that kid. But here's what ends up happening, and we have so many stories about this in the room from every coach. We have 28 sports at the University of North Carolina. These are stories from every coach in the room. You look at this kid and you're salivating. You end up bringing them in, and here's the way it works. Their freshman year, they're extraordinary. They help you win, and you're thinking, oh, my gosh. And here's what you're thinking. What you're thinking when you bring in this kid, when you've heard some rumors about it, you're thinking, yeah, our culture can change the kid. That's what you're thinking. Our culture can change the kid.
There's a lot of laughs to that statement.
Oh, exactly right. Exactly right. So, and then we bring the kid in, and then again, their freshman year, they're off the frigging charts, and you're thinking, my God, I knew my culture could change the kid. And then all of a sudden, from then on, as they get more comfortable within your culture, they start taking it apart. And then the destruction that occurs in their sophomore, junior, and senior year isn't worth the highlight reel that they helped form in their freshman year. And then you regret it. You regret bringing in this kid, because once they get comfortable, they will tear your culture to pieces. And so I'd love to pretend for a second that we can bring a kid in and transform someone with low character into becoming a part of a culture because of something we said or did or constructed around them. No, they're going to go off on their own tangent, and before you know it, you're going to regret ever bringing this kid in.
Hey, right now, if you're watching this podcast, pause it. I'm serious. Rewind what Anson just said. I don't even know where the camera is. Rewind that and play that like 10 times.
Well, here's my question, and you could answer either one of you. Does that that idea change if I say you're dealing with youth players? Because youth players maybe still need to learn. So you're in a selection phase. So you have the luxury of looking out there and saying, I'm taking these high character. You have the luxury of signing high character people, right? But as a person who deals with youth, do we have that luxury, or do we have some responsibility to teach?
Here's where I think the challenge is at a youth level. You guys, I'm giving all the responsibility to the youth in this scenario.
We'll just pass it on.
You guys will pass it on. Good. Pass it somewhere else. Because, the relationship that this kid has with their parents is critical. That's why, believe it or not, right now, I brought on this trip the book written in 1995 by William Damon, Greater Expectations. And the reason I'm reading this book for the second or third time is he gets to the core of it. The challenge you have at a youth level is, can you confront that parent that is basically allowing this kid to sort of run rampant? Can you, and it's going to be nearly impossible in my opinion, but this is where it begins. It begins by letting them get away with stuff when they're young, because then their character's going to be shaped. Not that, people can't change. I do think people can change, but I just don't know, because I've done this for 47 years at a collegiate level, and I don't think I've really completely converted, some moral reprobate by the time she was a senior. I'm not convinced I've ever been able to do that. So I think
we're going to have to add some dictionary definitions to the show notes.
Christian, we're going to throw this back to you guys.
By the way, Christian is very unhappy when you use words that bigger than what he uses, because normally he says words on every podcast, and I'm like, I don't have any idea what you're talking about.
Well, I just a couple of thoughts to that too, and there's some challenges. Exactly what Anson said around. For the youth, I do think responsibility is the word from a club perspective. And I know, the reason I'm here is because of Gary Beauty in CFC. And that's one of their challenges they talk about all of the time. How can they nurture, the side of a young person in their character development, but in their value structure? Not core values as a moral value of truth, trust, discipline, not that, but how they value another individual on their team. Not just to the extent of, are you going to pass me the ball so I get all the shots, but I can value intrinsically in a different way and learn to be able to lead and influence through that. The individual is interesting. This is my 14th year with Penske Racing NASCAR. So in North Carolina, we have that sport too. And the past 3 years, we've won 3 championships with different drivers, and we've got some really young pit crew guys. And you have 5 guys that have to complete 61 tasks in 8.5 seconds. So it's perfection. And we had this young Jack man. It was his first time up on a cup level car, but he got put on a house car, a championship car 3 years ago. And he was doing all the stuff right. And he'd never been a leader. He came from the world of football as a defensive end, just a great guy. And they had some cultural issues on the team, and I had to pull him aside. And he's like, Jeremy, I'm doing my part. And he used one of your danger words, and he said that over again in front of the whole team. I'm doing mine. And we had to stop him. We had to say, look, just because your individual performance is executing to the standard, you don't get to absolve yourself of the accountability for the rest of the team. And standard is the key word there. And that's what Anson has done. I'm going to tell you a story about Anson that Anson probably has forgotten about. This was great. In 2006, Anson had a young woman on his team by the name of Alyssa Ramsey. And Alyssa was a young lady I got to work with when she was in high school. And then when she would come home, I would hear some really good stories about Anson. And then during the season, they had a game. And she calls me after the game one night before we had cell phones and you couldn't do any of this stuff. And initially, she was all mad. And I'm like, well, tell me about the game. She's like, well, we won. And I said, oh, okay, well, then why are you frustrated, Alyssa? And Alyssa said, well, because Anson ripped us a new one in the locker room because he said we didn't respect the opponent. I go, well, you just said you won, like, and I don't remember the scores, maybe 3-0 or whatever it was. And he goes, and Alyssa said, we were up. Like, so we called off the dogs. We got comfortable, right? And Alyssa said, Anson said the standard of respecting your opponent is 90 minutes, you go all out. If that means it's 10-0, 20-0, it doesn't matter. That's the standard of what this culture is about, right? And Alyssa took that forever, and I've shared that story in every single boardroom, meeting room, schoolroom, Anson, forever. And I attribute to what you've done. It's great.
Am I allowed to swear on this? Can you edit it?
I'm not arguing with you.
Okay. So did Christian just give me permission? I can't tell.
Plausible deniability.
Okay. You're a lawyer, aren't you?
Recovering
lawyer. Okay, so this is going to be dangerous. So yeah, here's our philosophy. Our philosophy is the way you respect an opponent is by beating the absolute out of them. That's the way you respect an opponent. So the way you respect an opponent isn't by trying to keep the score as low as possible. By the way, we don't go to 20. I have a personal philosophy to stop at 9. So once we get to 9, we play possession. So it's never gone over 9. So for us, yeah, that's something that's baked into the culture. We're going to go as hard as we can, as long as we can. And so Ramsey was spot on. That's a part of our DNA. And by the way, I'm not vulgar. I am profane. So in case the lawyers in the room want to know what's going on.
Very good distinction.
Well, thank you. I just wanted Christian to know that, I understand the difference between.
Actually, between the amount of swearing and IQ. So I think it goes positively up. You might disagree from a character coaching perspective, but
well, I'm a member of a very conservative church, and my bishop came to watch me coach once. And following the game, he said, Anson, is it possible to coach without swearing? And I'm thinking, oh gosh, hell no.
I'll change a little bit, and because you guys have talked about culture in a variety of ways, mostly as impacted by leadership, and talking about organizational change, cultural change, big moments of change, whether it's a class that graduates, whether it's a new leader that comes in, whether there's a shift in the business or the ecosystem in which somebody's operating that requires a rethink or a adjustment in core processes or core actions. How do you manage through that?
Like Alex Ferguson retiring.
Yeah,
that's a big one. That'd be a big one.
Okay, I mean, I think I go back to Alex. So the culture of United was there before Alex. What Alex did is recognise that culture when he came in. Okay, so between Busby and Alex, we had quite a few managers who were nowhere near as successful as Alex became. So one of the things that Alex did was recognise that culture. And to your point, we got people who fit that culture. I made them better because of that culture, right? We didn't try and teach that culture. We absolutely. So he summed it up one day to me when we're just on the pitch and we're in a transfer window. And he sort of said, we all need to realise that the best player in the world could not necessarily play at Old Trafford, be a Manchester United player, right? So we always paid great, but we never paid the most. If anybody said, I've been having an offer from Real Madrid, we'd say, thank you very much, go to Real Madrid, right? Because it was sacrosanct that these guys came to you for the right reason, okay? You can't teach it, right? They're coming there to win, not for the biggest paycheck. And that went right the way through the organisation, right? Because there's a fundamental in a team when it starts operating like that is you can waste an awful lot of money because if you make the wrong selection, his teammates don't play with him. The high-performing teams are the best ones at weeding out the people themselves that don't fade. They don't go through a norm.
And so, in your estimation, and this might be a little controversial, what's happened since?
They've lost the culture. They don't know what a Manchester United player is. They pay the most money. For what?
And that's paying the most money is sort of a proxy for a value
he must be
that
good.
is prioritizing
Right?
the club.
He must be good. Not at all. Okay, so that's really important. Go on.
I love this clip I saw on Dan Hurley. Dan Hurley is a 2-time in a row national champion at the University of Connecticut in men's basketball.
Also profane. If you've ever watched any of his stuff.
I wasn't aware he was profane, but thank you for...
So he's on the team, the profane team.
Thank you for protecting me. So anyway, I'm listening to this, and this guy is spot on, because right now in the rooms with the other coaches at UNC, we're talking about the huge issue we all have. And so this has been a part of our recent conversation, and it's a good conversation. The thing I love about Dan Hurley is what he said. He said basically, we don't recruit the gold medalists. We recruit the silver medalists. And what he meant by that is what you're saying. Manchester United doesn't, throw out the largest paycheck to get the best player they can. They're going to find someone that fits within their culture. And so here are the sorts of kids that he chases. And by the way, as all of you guys know that know anything about basketball, UConn's not a blue blood. We're a blue blood. Kentucky's a blue blood. Duke is a blue blood, unfortunately. And certainly this year, it's very unfortunate that they are. Kansas is, et cetera, but UConn is not. So what does UConn have? They can't go after that guy. They go after the silver medalist. And the silver medalist is the sort of kid they recruit where if he's not getting maximum minutes and he's not getting his shot totals that he wants, the parents tell the kid, oh, you've got to work harder. What an interesting idea, to recruit a kid whose parents are going to tell him to get on the court, you've got to work a little harder. And those are the kids that he wants. Those are the kids within his culture, which has put him in a position in the name, image, and likeness era to win 2 in a row, where clearly he's not giving them as much money as the rest of us are that compete at a blue blood level. And so for me, listening to this is critical. That's the direction we have to go in. We have to figure out a way to recruit kids for the right reason and not sacrifice our identity in order to win by outbidding everyone in these wars at a football level and a basketball level.
Can I just
Yeah.
So you asked the question, how do you create that? So Alex recognized it, built incredible success over multi-years, based around getting the right people to fit in it, getting them work harder, be better. And by the way, they were some of the best in the world, right? Okay, so we didn't do it with Joe Average.
Yeah, but they became
better than they were, and the team became better than they were. I moved to Chelsea, which was, when we bought it, it was 1 week away from being bust. Its culture was awful, right? Awful, to the point of non-existent. We had great players. And the other thing that I took with me is Alex said one day that, until you've won, you don't know what it's like to win. Once you've won, you never want to lose. Okay? And that is as true today as it was 10 years ago, as it was 20, 30 years ago when he came. Because we had very, very good players, right, who'd never won. And Marino we brought in to start the culture. He had a completely different style. So it's not as though these guys are all lined up and they've all got the same 10 attributes. They're very different. But we wanted him to start that of winning because he understood what winning needed to be. We got talent. He needed to create that environment. And we in that first 2.5 years that he was there, we set the tone for the next 20.
For me, I think back to your question, I think change management is very difficult. I think in the military, we had a change of commanding officer every 2 to 3 years. And so that would mean the strategic vision, a lot of those things were going to obviously change. In sport, when I was with the Dodgers for 7 years, we roughly had about a 20 to 22% turnover of players and front office staff every year. So change management is just constant. And I think for us, philosophically, both within the military and professional sport, it starts with mindset. And I think that's part of the culture, as these gentlemen have said, that I think the mindset of, challenge versus threat. And that sounds cliche, but I think a lot of organizations that have difficulty with change management or change have a very threat bias. This is going to be a threat to the way things were, as opposed to change is constant. This is an opportunity. This is nothing more than a unique challenge. So I think it starts with mindset.
Before you jump in on that, I heard somebody say on a podcast the other day that fear is optimized for survival, not for growth and improvement. And so it can be very valuable in very small levels and moments, but it's not how you build anything great, which resonates with that.
I love that. I think too, Anson mentioned this word identity. We've talked about this word identity, and that is fundamental to being a winning leader at any level, in any domain, in any industry, in your home. And when that identity is anchored in the past, that's where you get in trouble with change management. And because if you can't outperform your self-identity and you bring in a new leader into a new organization or a new team to do that, and the mindset and the value structure of the group that's in there is, but this is who we are, then you've got tension, because the mission's going to change when you have change management, right? And how you go about that is going to change. And that means people's identity needs to be able to change. I need to ask myself, who does the mission need me to be right now? Regardless of who we were, regardless of how I feel, regardless of what, but who does the mission need me to be? That makes it more than me. And when we look at trying to redesign cultures, and there's some layers that we find in our research around decision making, such as the stakes have got to be high. Like, nobody's coming to your party if the stakes aren't high. When you went through the change and Alex came through, I mean, the stakes were at an all-time high. We've got to look at winning, all the things that you said. And when the stakes are high, that creates a different invitation for a different type of performer. But it's not just stakes, then you got to have sacrifice. The sacrifice is, what am I willing to give up? Even if I am the high performer, even if I'm the best scorer, even if I'm the best salesman, and I brought in $200 million in the company last year, I still have to sacrifice something in that conversation, and that piece is real. Then standards say, well, how high are we going to aim, in those pieces? That's the third one. Then the fourth one, there is selflessness. So you can have a high performer, and they can be the baller, but are they willing to be selfless too? And again, that comes back to, just so many stories of Anson and everybody up here of what they've done. And then the last one I think is the toughest too, is surrender. That's the last one. You got to surrender to the new process, right? Or maybe surrender to elements that make you who you were, that you add on, right? To be able to look at who those pieces are. And, ego doesn't like to surrender. Ego doesn't like sacrifice. Ego certainly doesn't like somebody else's standard. And ego only likes their stakes. And so that's if you can filter through that just to help determine organizational change, that can at least give you some directional certainty.
I'm going to ask a question now. I've heard terms like trust, empathy, surrender. There was a clip from Gino Auriemma a couple of years ago. I think he was training before the Final Four, and he said, we had a practice, and it wasn't great, and then we went and we practiced how we used to practice, where it was really hard. And he said, the best players said, man, we got to do more of that. But there were plenty of players who kind of took a step back and said, well, what is this? I'm not comfortable with this. And I think what he was highlighting is some of what you've talked about, the importance of training resilience. You've talked about the competitive cauldron and the fact that if you're number 32, you're number 32, do something about it. He's talking about culturally, it's really hard to do that. And I think every coach who's being honest, in youth soccer, especially college soccer, I'm sure, it is a very, very difficult road to walk of how do you get that sort of culture, that sort of competitiveness, that sort of stress, building trust with athletes to actually embrace that right now when that is very countercultural. And so I thought that clip was powerful because it exposed a really big challenge. To me, it goes back to there's got to be some sort of trust built within the culture, between the players, between the coaches. How do you build that?
Well, the best athletes in any sport work harder, right? They just put more effort in. They put more time in. They don't need to be told, right? I mean, there's no shortcut, right? There is no shortcut, and we hammered that down in in the disciplines, the organisation, the shortcut. I think we as a sport, as football, have got better, much better at looking after people across the piece, whether it's medical, mental, diet, much more individual. It used to be everybody used to run 10K because that's what you did, right? Right.
Wife smoked in the dressing room.
That's what it was. So we have moved on dramatically, but there is no shortcut.
I saw something. Austin Reeves from the Lakers. He was saying how when he first got there as a rookie to the Lakers, he made it his personal goal to beat LeBron James into the building on game day. And so he said the first day we had a game at 7:00, and so I showed up at 3:00, and LeBron was already in there. And so the next time I showed up at 1:00, and LeBron was already in there. And he said, then I showed up at noon, and LeBron was already there. And he said, forget this, man. I'm not showing up seven hours before the game. But then they showed LeBron talking about how he's doing what he's doing at 40. And he's like, I've put all of it in. I've put all the work in. I take care of myself. I put all the work in. And that's, to your point, it's like there's no shortcut to this. Like there's one way to get there. And it's not going to be easy. And that's our challenge. Obviously, we're trying to help kids understand that there's no easy to it.
There's a cliche, and this is the cliche I use. There are a lot of different ways to share this, but I think all of you guys will get the point. Average players want to be left alone. Good players want to be coached. Great players want the truth. Well, I've had the rare privilege of coaching some of the greatest players of all time. I mean, of all time. And one of my favorites to coach was Michelle Akers. Michelle Akers might be the only player in women's soccer history that did not have a weakness. And let me tell you what my player conferences with her were all about. She would come in, she didn't want any praise ever for anything. If in the player conference I didn't criticize her enough, she would leave a little bit disappointed in me and challenge me for the next time. I had to invent things in order to create criticism. I invented this thing called tactical agility, and this is it. I mean, all she wanted was criticism. Tactical agility is we're winning 5-0. There's 30 seconds left on the clock, and the most aggressive outside back on the other team is about to kick you up in the air as the ball's rolling out of bounds, and you're trying to protect it. Have the tactical agility to realize we are winning 5-0. There are 30 seconds left in the game, and I don't want your ankles above your head. So I had to invent stuff just to criticize her. But the thing I absolutely loved about coaching her is all she wanted was criticism. She wanted to be the greatest player of all time. All she wanted was criticism in every single meeting. So all these, psychology tricks, we all learn to construct, better players, the sandwich, positive, negative, positive. So we surround the negative information with two pieces of positive information. God forbid we have to do that these days for sure. But it was really interesting. This player that she corrected absolutely everything. Anytime you would give her any kind of criticism, all of a sudden the next day in practice, you would see her before practice or after practice working on your critique. And so this is if you want to be truly extraordinary, go there. And then just for the kids that are out there and the coaches that are out there, get Carly Lloyd's book. And I hope this doesn't insult Carly. I think she knows I respect her. I saw Carly when she was a junior in high school. I looked at her and I was thinking, no, I'm not gonna chase her. I think if we had chased her, we would have gotten her. I said no. And then all of a sudden, I saw her ascend to becoming basically the best player in the world during a stretch. And then I bought her book because I wanted to find out what happened. Get her book. In the 3rd chapter, Smackdown, she talks about meeting James Galanis and about the relationship with those two. And she reconstructed herself. And so I think Every player at the University of North Carolina, ever since Carly wrote that book, has read that book, and we spend more than one session on SmackDown, Chapter 3. And so one thing that would be really cool within your culture is to have at least that chapter shared with everyone. Because then what they're going to understand, it gets back to what Eric was saying, which, by the way, I love, Eric, about the adversative method. Galana sat down with her, and basically he didn't want to coach her. He said, no, I mean, you're lazy. I mean, you've got a big ego. You're not fit. He just ripped her a new one, just listed all these different things, and she still wanted him to work with her, and then she reconstructed herself. So the players that want to be extraordinary, and let me go back to what I said before. I looked at her as a junior. I said, no, I think we could have gotten her. In fact, what's really cool about her book, she talks about the last game she played in college. We destroyed her. Rutgers played the University of North Carolina, and then we obviously took her out of the tournament. That was her last collegiate game. But what she did post-college was, this is post-college, because some people think, oh, wait, it's too late. No. This kid did it post-college, which in my opinion even takes her to a higher level based on what she did. And also, in my mind, it accelerates Galanis, that was frank with her. And these days, you guys are right. You almost can't be frank with a player anymore because you're going to be attacked by the parents. They're going to be hiring Christian to serve as a lawyer against this, this coach in court based on something he said. And so, Eric, I really appreciate what you're talking about with the adversative method. And I'm going to have more conversations with you about that because I think that's the future for this culture of American player.
Well, you guys, that's amazing insight. Jeremy, do you have something to add to that?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to end with, I think with a lot of youth sports organizations, so not just youth soccer, but baseball, basketball, volleyball, the ones that we get to go around, culture gets mislabeled by young coaches and parents where culture is the end game. And culture is predominantly has a social cohesion effect, meaning culture means we're going to go do a team movie night. Culture means we're going to go do some extracurricular and bond together. But in the world of high performance, at this level, at the levels where everybody up here has been and been the reason of success and winning and even owning number one. That's different than pursuing number one. Culture is not driven by social cohesion. It's driven by task cohesion. And any sport is not a test, it's a task. And when young coaches who are pouring into young players, when they can look and figure out what's the invitation I can give today to the brains of these young men and women to invite them into cohesively accomplish a task. And then we have the best chance, I think, to be able to build some pretty incredible young people. So
it's great. Brilliant. And, I will double down on my most esteemed panel that we've had, and that's unbelievable insight. We end every show with a thing called Bracken Brainbuster. Again, I said I don't know how it got that name, but Dean Linke has done a great job of keeping it going. And so I'm going to ask you a random question and see what your answer is. So I have a two-parter today, and I'm doing it in honor of us being in Vegas. Do you bet? And if you had to bet, if you don't, what game would it be? Roulette, craps, whatever. Eric, you happen to be right next to me, so.
I don't bet.
Okay.
I think I lost when I was 18 or 21, whatever it was. When I was younger, I went into a casino with $100 and I lost it within 5 seconds. So I've made the never betting again. So
but if you did,
if I had to, probably penny slots, and I would stop after 10 minutes.
Okay, good shout.
I had dinner last night with Mike Connerly. He's a big-time gambler.
Does bet.
So part of the conversation when we were having this meal was about gambling. And so he asked me, do I gamble? I said, well, I tried it a couple times and didn't leave a good taste in my mouth. And sitting right next to me is my wife. And by the way, Christian, thank you for the way you're treating her. So she's sitting next to me, and we went to the Trotters. Maybe it's in White Plains. I can't even remember where the Trotters are anymore. White Plains, New York, and we decided to bet. So I'm looking at the list of horses. My wife's maiden name was Gary, and they had this horse called the Great Gary. So I decided to put money on the Great Gary, thinking that the stars would align and I would win the bet. And of course, I did not. And the only other time I've gambled was with one of the Chisowitzes. He had a clinic in Atlantic City. And I was advised by all these gamblers from the Chisowitz family how to gamble. And they said if you're losing in an establishment, what you do on your exit is to just throw a lot of money down to recoup your losses on one last bet. And by the way, I won that bet, and I recouped the entire loss for the evening of gambling. So I had one, obviously, bad experience with it, and one on the advice of a gambling collection of Ukrainians. Are they from Ukraine? I ended up surviving for that reason. So I've got sort of a mixed bag there.
So if you were going to gamble, would it be on horses? Would it be on?
No, it would be sports gambling. So I would do my research. I would figure out.
Seem like you're leaning in on this.
What's that?
You have a good sports book here.
I know. So there you have it.
Peter?
No, I don't bet. Not interested. I mean, not even sure I know what to bet on. But probably if I was forced, it would be on the horses.
Fair enough.
I like that. Like these three gentlemen, I have never gambled. The only bet I've ever done is to bet on me. That's the only bet I've ever had.
That's low-hanging fruit. That's low-hanging fruit.
But now, with that said, my wife is on the way to Vegas as we speak. She lands here in about an hour, and she's never been to Vegas, and all she has talked about for 2 months is getting to go play blackjack. So I could be a poor man here by 5 o'clock today. Poorer, that's exactly right, where that goes. But, we'll see.
All right, Christian?
I have a very similar story to Eric of losing my $40, which was like every dollar I had at age 18 in about 5 minutes at Ho Chunk Casino. So no, I don't bet. And if I was going to bet, I would probably be sports. I'd probably have fun with like the Super Bowl.
Gotcha. Not shockingly, I'm just like you guys. I am not a gambler, no interest in gambling. I can only imagine.
We appreciate Circa, and we're
yes,
happy to be here.
That's right. I could only think if I lost of all the things that I could have done with that money, and it would eat me alive. But I think if I were to do it, I would probably go roulette, just because it seems pretty exciting. Just that one thing. So that's what we got. That was our Bracken Brangos. Thanks for participating.
I want to thank you guys for being here and for presenting. It's going to be our biggest event ever. We're expecting over 900 people, which has been unbelievable to see that growth. And the really cool part about it, and I've talked to you guys individually on this, is the people in the room are going to represent well over 500,000 youth soccer players across America. And so some of these discussions and lessons, it's a real opportunity or inflection point to maybe move the needle a little bit, because I don't think we can ever move it too far too fast. So we just got to nudge it a little bit and move people in a good direction. So appreciate you being here, being willing to share all these stories, and thanks for your support.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
This has been another edition of Breaking the Line, the ECNL Podcast. If you have a question you want answered, send it to info@theecnl.com. Thanks to our amazing panel, Christian, Doug, Jacob, Colin, and the entire ECNL crew. For each and every one of them and all of you, I'm Dean Linke, and we'll see you next time.